What is up, Sleep Tribe? Welcome to a brand new episode of the Healthy Sleep Revolution podcast. I am your host, Dr. Meghna Dassani. Today, it is my pleasure to bring to you guys one of my mentors. Y'all may know her from the amazing work she's doing with sleep, especially around vitamin D. And if you've heard me at all, or you've been in my life for any length of time, you know I will chew your ear off about all of this. So we have this wonderful lady to thank. I want to introduce to you guys Dr. Stasha Gominak. She just told me I don't go by doctor anymore. I just go by Stasha. And I was like, no, we're going to give credit where it's due. So welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Meghna. I'm thrilled to talk to your audience.
Yes. And so you are an MD, you're a trained neurologist. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I know you practiced for a number of years before you went down the little rabbit hole of sleep. What took you down that path?
So my training was actually in neuropathy. So I'm a specialist in neuropathy, but I was practicing as a general neurologist. I'm living in East Texas. And about 2005, one of my daily headache sufferers. So I had about half of my practice in relatively healthy people, but they have daily headache, which is a horrible, horrible struggle to deal with. And most of the population that are affected by that are young, healthy women who've just had a few kids and they don't have other medical problems, but they're very disabled by this problem. And one of them demanded a sleep study. So I have a very biochemical view of how headache happens. So I really didn't think that she needed a sleep study, but none of my drugs worked in her case. So we did a sleep study and I didn't know anything about sleep at the time. In fact, most MDs were at the time encouraged not to ask because then the next would be, yes, I sleep badly, and yes, I'd like a sleeping pill. So we're directed away from even inquiring about how you sleep because we didn't know what to do about it. So she had sleep apnea and she was not overweight. She did not look like the type of population that we were told to look for sleep apnea in, which means that other 32-year-olds who exercise and are normal weight could have sleep apnea also. And the thing that got me interested was she wore a CPAP device and her headaches went away. And to me, that was like impossible. Like one, she can't even brush her hair because her head hurts. She can't put her head on the pillow because her head hurts. And she's strapped on this thing. That means this does not have a placebo effect. Okay. It's not going to be, give me one of those sexy things. I want to wear them. You know, it's a torture device, yet she wore it and her headaches went away. So then I began to do sleep studies in all of the other daily headache sufferers. And to make a long story short, I wound up doing about 5 years of sleep studies in anyone who would let me. So at the beginning, it was these young, healthy females. But then as I'm seeing stroke victims on the weekends, it's quite obvious they have a sleep disorder in the background too. And now I'm doing sleep studies in anybody who will let me. And the most interesting finding was that this much younger population, mostly females, a lot of teenagers, younger kids, they're otherwise completely normal, but they do not have normal sleep studies. They don't have apnea. So that one gal had pretty prominent apnea, and I got to see the machine make her better, which was important because I'm thinking drugs, chemistry, biochemistry, and just blowing air up her nose, which as far as I was concerned, didn't have to do with oxygen. She didn't have drops in oxygen. So there was an aspect to, if I could stay in the deeper phases of sleep, maybe the brain is making chemicals that are analogous to my drugs that are taking her headaches away. Well, all we do all day is to make chemicals that make all the diseases go away. That means if you start to see it through that lens, you begin to realize that doctors are only needed when the normal repair processes fail. And that means when the sleep has failed. And once you see that, you can never stop seeing it. And then you really feel, one, very inadequate that you don't know anything. And so I was using sleeping pills like mad. And I really did notice that we had missed the fact that many of the medicines we were using to prevent daily headache really made the sleep better. We didn't see it through that lens, that the sleep disorder was the primary disorder. The headache was the result. And after doing lots and lots of sleep studies, because they didn't have sleep apnea, I couldn't use a CPAP device. But what they did have was abnormal sleep studies that weren't being reported as such. They would say no significant apnea. That is very important because if you read into the study, what you'll find next is, oh, they don't stop breathing, but they also don't have any rapid eye movement sleep. Well, that's important. Why is that happening? Why would this completely normal person, and oh, by the way, getting into rapid eye movement sleep or getting into slow wave sleep and getting paralyzed while you're sleeping is 250 million years old. This is how dinosaurs slept. This part of the brain is so old that I'm using the dinosaur as an example because the reptilian brain, the brain stem, is exactly the same. The biochemistry of reptiles is the same in this area of the brain. That means when we're trying to distinguish ourselves as we're so special, well, I'm sorry, the dinosaurs covered the planet too, and they had to sleep. They had to remember who to eat and who would eat them. They had to teach their kids. They had to, they have to do every single thing that we do. That means if you look at it that way, then you also realize, these sleep disorders weren't happening in the 1970s when I was in school. When the first sleep studies were done in 1970 in Stanford, they were normal, quote unquote, studies. And we based our normals on that. I also know because I was alive, the other kids in high school with me weren't committing suicide. They weren't on antidepressants. We have been handed an answer for these things that have developed over the last 40 years. It's not that the answer, which is stress, toxic environment, food that doesn't have nutrition, all the chemicals, those issues are real and there are people addressed. It's just not what my job is. So when my job is sitting across the room from a mom who has an 8-year-old who's tired, then if I just say, oh, it's stress, what do you expect? Kids go to school and they're afraid they're going to be shot with an automatic weapon. That doesn't give her any path to improve that child's life. So in my view, even though all of those things might be true, they don't give me a way to make my kid better or make me better. Therefore, when I stumbled by accident into the idea that the brain, this brainstem area, it might be malfunctioning because it was missing something, which originally was from a sleep study. So fast forward 5 years, I'm doing sleep studies in everybody. And I have an 18-year-old who's beautiful, about to go to college. She sleeps for 10 hours. Her sleep study shows that she never gets into deep sleep. She has 10 solid hours, 35 times an hour. She wakes to light sleep. She never really accomplishes the normal transitions of sleep, which means her brainstem is malfunctioning in a way that is actually fatal. I mean, that gal is not going to live another 50 years. So I'm looking at that sleep study and it turns out she winds up to have B12 deficiency. That's low enough that it even makes me go, whoa, that's weird. And I'm also by this time thinking of the brainstem and sleep as a single cell, which is also a very nerdy, weird thing to be doing because that doesn't really make any sense. But I'm struggling with, why are my patients moving during sleep? Well, they're too paralyzed around here. Their legs aren't paralyzed enough. And I go through all these thought processes and I finally find discussions about the anatomy of how do we get paralyzed? Where does that happen in the brain? And so I'm in this funny state where the B12 deficiency doesn't bring up, oh, this is a deficiency disease and I'm going to go look at B12. Instead, I think, well, I wonder if the sleep cells need this B vitamin, It has to keep itself operational and make repairs and maybe it's missing that, which is a brand new way of thinking about it. And there's 50 years of literature about B12 being powerful in sleep. We just don't reference it, we don't go and look at it. So those two things, thinking of it on a cellular level, thinking of it as potentially a deficiency state, then led to somebody else mentioning to me that, oh, my doctor did my vitamin D level and she told me it's low and she gave me vitamin D and my wrist pain went away. And for me, it didn't really fall on a fertile ground. I just thought, okay, I'm drawing blood anyway. Let's throw vitamin D in there. And I really knew nothing about vitamin D, nor was I really interested. I was just desperate. Okay. If you don't have sleep apnea, I don't have much to offer you. How come nobody's writing about this? Let's open up our curiosity and see what we can find. And so for 4 months in 2009, I measured B12 levels and D levels in all these people who had sleep studies, daily headache, and they were all low. And it just so happened I was measuring them in August through December, and they were all low. And I really didn't know what to think about that. The B12 was not low in everyone. It was occasionally low. So it can't be the major mover of this picture. But then in December, 2 guys come in and say, hey, I've been wearing my CPAP. You promised me that my sleep apnea would go away. and it didn't. I'm still wearing it, but the last time I was in here, you sent me that little note about my vitamin D being low, and you told me to get vitamin D. And within about 3 weeks of starting that, my sleep got better and my headaches went away. And two guys tell me the same exact thing in a week. And I was like, wow, I happen to know that everybody's D is low. And it's weird because it's fall when it should be the highest of the whole year. So I go to PubMed and type in vitamin D and sleep. And at the time, there were 0 hits on those two search terms. But the next little accident of search terms is the brain and vitamin D. And I stumble into this guy named Walter Stumpf, who is a neurologist, but also an endocrine chemist, who for his 30 years of career has been describing where vitamin D receptors are in the brain, the various parts, the specific parts of the brain, like why would this bone vitamin be in the brain? And there are vitamin D receptors throughout the nuclei, or the little clumps of neurons that are in the brainstem, in both the area that tells our brain what time it is, so the clock section that says time to get drowsy, that runs the phase timing, and the part of the brainstem that runs our paralysis. Well, that means these people all actually have a hormone deficiency that's affecting their ability to transition into sleep, go through the phases of sleep, and then wake up as a normal person. Especially for children, this is a disaster because children develop their brain and their body in deep sleep while they're paralyzed. And if you steal away that time, even if you steal away half of it every night, that slows them down. And it is also very much parallel to the increasing incidence of autism, ADD, all sorts of changes in moods in children, anxiety and depression. And that literature is very obvious. The piece that's been difficult is all the kids with autism have sleep problems. All the kids with autism have belly problems. It's hard to describe whether or not the sleep disorder came first, or does autism give the sleep disorder? Most of the time, people are looking at it the way we have in medicine, which we were trained, depression causes your sleep to be screwed up. You either get insomnia or hypersomnia or sleeping too much. That's not the case. It's the opposite. The sleep disorder causes the mood disorder. If I don't have something in my hand that makes the sleep disorder better, I can never really prove that. But as soon as I start using this vitamin D, so what happened was I called up Walter Stumpf and I said, hey, you don't know me. I'm a neurologist in East Texas, but you've written all these things about vitamin D, and I think you're brilliant. And the way you're thinking about vitamin D as the hormone that manages our behavior for hibernation, that we get dormant in the winter, and that this is really the way we become dormant. Every hormone in the body affects behaviors over the animal's whole body. So he's a really smart guy. He's put together this really amazing idea set that says low vitamin D will cause infertility. It'll cause differences in the metabolism. You'll gain weight. Your thyroid will get all screwed up. He's projecting that all of these things will happen. And he starts writing about it in the 80s before this epidemic happens. And because there's no clinical evidence, his other colleagues all kind of say, wow, he's kind of arrogant and thinks he's the only one who knows what's going on. But in actual fact, he predicted all these things that have happened. And he even has articles about postpartum depression that are being run by vitamin D and how chemically, why that would show up and, the parts of the brain that are affected. So because of his scientific studies and my clinical observation, we worked together and published an article in 2012 that theorized that the sleep disorders that are becoming more and more common around the globe are linked to vitamin D. Mm-hmm. I'll stop there and see if you have any other questions.
Yeah, no, this is fast. I mean, I could listen to you all day, and I know our listeners are probably feeling the same, but let's tie in with, I know you're huge on the gut microbiome and vitamin D and sleep and how everything ties in together. Could you dive into that?
Sure. And the important part was the vitamin D worked for about 2 years and then failed. And that was very disappointing. We all were taking D. We all figured out how to use the D safely, how to get the blood level. It's a hormone, so you have to have a blood level, how to get all that squared away. Even though we got really good at it, the better sleep failed. And then all sorts of other bad things started to happen. And I'm going to give you the punchline first. It turns out that vitamin D is also a pivotal support chemical for the bugs in our belly. That means when we go low in the D, we're not the only ones that suffer. The microbiome, the normal, healthy 4 bigger groups of bacteria that are supposed to inhabit our belly and are actually a major part of our biochemistry. You really can't be a normal human unless you have these 4 phyla. And if you do not feed D to those bugs, they die off, and other ones that are not supporting our health replace them. So at the same time that sleep disorders have become epidemic and all sorts of other things, irritable bowel or an acknowledgement that we have the wrong microbiome has also been growing in the background. So one, it's not actually written in the scientific articles until 2020 that if you change the D supply to the human, you can actually trace which bacteria start to grow in them. But it seemed perfectly logical to me that when I was giving all my patients vitamin D, their bugs should have come back, and they did not. The IBS did not clear up. And there were many things that were still not addressed. My patients didn't lose weight, even though they were exercising more. There were increasing amounts of pain, arthritic pain, inflammatory pain. So I felt like the D was making them sleep better, and that sleeping better is not just about lying there unconscious. Sleeping better is so that you make repairs. That's why we're trying to sleep, so that we grow and we develop our brain. If we're, under puberty, if we're adults, we're repairing everything so we don't have disease. If you don't do that, then you actually begin to develop things and you age fast. So in essence, I was looking for something else. I felt like my intention was right, but something else had become deficient. And one of my patients brought in a book about another vitamin called pantothenic acid, which no one is writing about because the current dogma is pantothenic acid deficiency doesn't exist because it's in every food. So not knowing that, she brought in a book that was about rheumatoid arthritis and how if you give this B vitamin, pantothenic acid, their sleep and their rheumatoid arthritis pain both got better. So she brought it to me because she knew I was crazy about sleep. And so I went to the references from this book, and there were studies that showed that if you block pantothenic acid at the GI tract, then you induce insomnia in very little period of time. 4 things happen. They get a funny gait, they get burning in their hands and feet, they have problems with their belly, and they can't sleep. So that replicated a lot of the complaints that a lot of us are having. So I followed what the book said, which was 400 milligrams of pantothenic acid. And at the time, I knew nothing about the B vitamins. I ended up getting another preparation that's a B complex called B100. And that is large doses of all 8 B. Okay, so there's another piece to this, which is very important, which is, and again, the punchline first, the 8 B vitamins. So there's, when we look at what the vitamins are named, it's A, and then there's 8 chemicals called B, and then there's C and D. Like, what up with that? Like, why would there be 8 things called B? And it turns out it's really because all of those 8 chemicals come from our intestinal bacteria. They are all bacterial growth factors. And the microbiology literature about bacteria substantiates that. And the people who were writing about B vitamin absorption had started to suggest that there were always 2 sources, that thiamine came from the bugs in our belly and from the food. And they just weren't brave enough to say, well, really, they all come from the poop bacteria, and actually they're feeding each other. So these 4 large groups, every single one of those species has the need for a B vitamin that it can't make, and it makes a couple that somebody else, its neighbor, needs. That means it's a symbiotic foursome, and that's a big grouping. So in the background, the next suggestion was, oh, my patients have not only D deficiency, but they are lacking the normal microbiome. So that when I give them D that makes them sleep more, their primary source of these additional building blocks that are needed for every single cellular repair are deficient. And I've actually made them worse because I've made them slowly over 2 years develop a deficiency state. That particular observation becomes even more important because within the last 4 years, we've had this COVID epidemic. That means everybody starts on D. They're just on D. They're not told to do blood levels. But 4 or 5 years later, after they think they're doing something good for their body, that move towards, oh, D requires these other building blocks means that they show up with rheumatoid arthritis or ulcerative colitis or horrible rashes or terrible pain, bad things. It's not that the doctors are going to realize that it's really from D. It's not from D, really. It's from giving D to a person without recognizing that you must do 2 things. You must get the D up and you must bring back the microbiome. And bringing it back is not about dumping bacteria down the tube. The bacteria have certain requirements. They have growth factor requirements. That's what those Bs are. That means if you want to bring back the healthy, happy ones, you have to give them the B vitamins that they needed as sort of a starter culture of Bs. So once I gave my patients D plus this B50 or B100, then their natural microbiome came back. And after 3 months, you have to stop the additional Bs because now your natural bugs are making the 8 chemicals that they were intended to make for us. That means this is a much more complicated picture than here, take some vitamin. Right. That led to me actually doing things by experimentation that finally arrived at what's called the Right Sleep program that has a workbook that shows you stepwise what to do for how long and what to observe. Because the other very difficult part of this is we think in terms, or at least I was trained in terms of, I have the lab slip, I have the levels of things. I'm the smart one, and I tell the patient what. And that does not work in this setting. It really has to be, I as the patient have to buy into the idea that it turns out the blood levels of the vitamins are worthless. Except for B12, it appears that none of the B vitamin levels are really reflecting what's being used in the cell. That's probably the case for most of the minerals as well. So the only window that we have into, is your brain lacking in whatever, iron, B12, whatever, is what are the things about my body that will tell me if I need XYZ, okay? Following sleep is a very, very consistently valuable way of knowing, does my brain have all the pieces it needs to accomplish these chemical changes that allow us to go through the sleep stages that I was mentioning.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into this. I do have a question about right sleep, but before I do, I kind of want to sneak this question in just so I don't forget. At what age do you recommend, because we see a lot of kids with sleep issues in my practice. That's what a lot of moms that are listening to this episode are probably thinking. At what age do they start to worry about this, or what age can they actually do something for their kids? Or how young is too young?
You want to do this before you get pregnant, okay? That would be the idea, okay? So there are two ways to look at this problem. One is, it would be so much easier to prevent this from happening because every child is born to a mom who has a low D, who's lost her own microbiome because she's been told that she needs to stay out of the sun. So I actually have videos that are specifically about what if you'd like to use vitamin D and the Right Sleep program before, so that you could actually very inexpensively fix your infertility. So there are direct relationships between D and infertility. So if your D is low, you suppress ovulation and you can't get pregnant. So there's a whole idea of preventing this by changing the public health recommendation. But let's just say that you don't hear about this until your kid's 2. So I have videos that are about starting the program before, then following during pregnancy to reassure you that this is the right biological message to send to your body and to your fetus. And then in the first year of life, feeding your baby, because the natural source for the D for your baby and the D that you feed your baby in the breast milk then establishes the normal microbiome for your baby. That means if you've done it before, you've got everything covered. Now, let's say your kid is 2 years old and has never slept through the night. I have a whole other set of videos that are about children and the different age. So if you're finished with breastfeeding, then you have 2 options. You can put the kid out in the sun more because summer's coming up. So that's one approach. But then you also have to realize that just putting them out in the sun doesn't actually make their bugs come back. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about that in another episode if you'd like. But ultimately, that means you have to figure out what's the B vitamin dose, what's the multivitamin dose for a little teeny kid with a little tiny GI tract. So how do you use this program to feed and support a microbiome in my 2-year-old? More importantly than any of that detail is, how do I know if I'm doing the right thing for this most precious object that I've ever had in my whole life? Okay, I want no one that comes to my site to hurt their kid. So in my view, in the little tiny kids, you don't use the blood level because we really don't know if a 4-year-old's blood level needs to be 60 to 80, which the adult does. It really usually looks like in the mom who's been on the program through her pregnancy with a D level of 60, the baby's D level is in the 40s. And that baby starts to sleep through the night at 6 months, is an easy baby, feeds, goes back to sleep. So it looks to me like the ideals for the baby are really in the 40s, and that we arrive at that by having the mom's level in the 60s. So for the little kids in second year of life, toddler stage, I want people watching what happens to their sleep, because every single kid is unique. And you just have to kind of understand what the concepts are of what we're doing, but always watching their sleep. And even though it's not you, most people who have kids that don't sleep have some sort of monitor in the room. So they know whether the kid wakes up. If they don't come out of the room, they'll still know if the kid wakes up. And then you kind of see this as a longer path where we're giving raw materials to the body. And then the brain is using that and making little repairs every night. So it's a long process. Vitamins don't cure, sleep cures.
Yeah, that is just the building block that we build our sleep on to be able to get our body to where we need it to. Yeah, so thank you. So what I'm hearing is it's never too late. It doesn't matter what age or what stage you are in. There's always the chance, the opportunity to get to better, healthier, more restful sleep so your body can heal. I hope our listeners are dialing this in. As we wind up, I want to touch upon your Right Sleep program. I've trained with you, so I know exactly what it is you teach and how you go through it, but talk our listeners through what it would look like if they chose to work with you, and also how they can get a hold of you.
Okay, let me answer one thing parenthetically before that, because it's really important to recognize that what you do as a dental sleep person is just as important as what I do as a brain sleep person. And both of those are extremely important in children. So in the background, if I, as a parent, have a kid who can't breathe through their nose and there's a mouth breather, there's a whole logic behind what you're going to do to intervene there. But it turns out D deficiency is directly related to having nasal congestion. So that there's a lot of reason why you'd want to do two different parts, looking at the oral anatomy at the same time as you look at the brain anatomy and the brain chemistry, so that both of those should be looked at. In terms of working with me, what I've tried to do is to make the workbook a piece that anyone can use, no matter what their level of education, that will take them through the how to do this. We're talking about the why. Why should we do this in the first place, and how we're fascinated with what can happen to people in terms of healing when their sleep is better. But the what should I do day to day is really covered in the workbook and the videos. I also have, when you buy the workbook now, you are introduced into the Right Sleep program, and you have access to Right Sleep question and answer. So once a month, we have a question and answer session, and I end up answering the same questions a lot of times, but I actually turn out to like that each person, as they join this, often they're not motivated to use the frequently asked questions, and it really enlarges the discussion. So it gives you an opportunity to sit in and say, okay, well, this was my question, that was answered for me. And you can look through all the recordings of the question and answers that have happened over the last year. So you have all these resources to use on the website. There's also a private Facebook group where you can ask questions. I also have videos like this one where I've done podcasts or webinars that you can watch. So it gives you multiple different ways to learn about how my kid might be impacted, how my mother-in-law might be impacted, all these different ages and all these different manifestations. So I also do individual coaching. You'll find that under Work Together. And there are getting to know you appointments that you can make that are just basically designed to say, my child has this, or I have this. Would this be an appropriate program for me? So there are a couple of different types of appointments there for the questions that you might want.
Perfect. Sounds like you have made it easy for people to get help and to be able to get to healthier sleep. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out here and come online and chat with me about this. For our listeners, I will have all of the details about how you can work with Dr. Gominak, how you can do the Right Sleep program, learn more about her. Everything will be in the show notes. That I said chart notes. Can you imagine? We were talking about patients in the show notes. So you will be able to access her. We'll have social media handles. We'll have her website, all of the good stuff. So thank you for coming on and sharing all of this. It truly is a pleasure. And I do think I'll have to take you up on coming back to discuss some of the other questions that we so badly wanted to dive into. Before I let you go, top 3 tips for parents that you would say.
I would, the first thing is never give up. It is so difficult. You never know which kid is going to show up in the morning. Every single day is a new day with a kid. I saw totally miraculous things happen when I started to get sleep better, and things that I was taught would never get better for developmental delay and things like autism actually slowly got better. There isn't an easy, quick answer, but that doesn't mean there isn't an answer. So 1, never give up. And 2, just keep trying things. And my program is 1, and everybody has a theory. I spoke to a woman this week who her 3-year-old had just been told that, she's been told that her daughter has autism. And she was just distraught. I mean, she really couldn't pay attention to what I was telling her because she was so upset. The most important answer is that's a description of where your baby is right this moment. It doesn't mean that it has to continue to be that way. And the way that you change it is by improving the sleep. And since many of us, most of the people who are giving advice about sleep are talking about the environment around the child, it's a chemical problem. It's not the environment. It's not something you're doing wrong as a parent, in my view. So that means there's another path that you can follow. So there's hope.
I can't think of a better line to end the show on. There is hope, which is all we can all ask for. So thank you so much. And to our listeners, share this episode. This is gold, pure gold. This is some information that everybody could benefit from. And I will see everybody next time. Thank you.